Welcome to IAB Canada's podcast, The Business of Digital.
Within hours.
And thank you so much for tuning in to this podcast from IAB Canada, The Business of Digital. And this morning we are so pleased to have Sharon Bauer here, the Senior Manager of Privacy and Regulatory Information Management Group at KPMG. Good morning, Sharon.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. And I couldn't think of a better time to have you come in to talk to us a little bit about privacy, which is the hottest topic this year. I can't think of a conversation that I've been in over the past couple of weeks where this has not come up.
Well, that's good news because we want people to talk about privacy. So I'm happy to hear that.
100%. And we just came back from a global summit where I think that what's really happening is that this is of global interest now, and where we've always been involved in PIPEDA and regulation, but now the stakes seem to be getting higher because there's things going on across borders, and we're having to start paying attention to citizens and protecting citizens that are outside of our own borders. So that means that there's a lot of rapid change, and IAB Canada has certainly been following the potential amendments that are going to be coming up to PIPEDA in 2020. We know that the Digital Charter signaled this near, I guess it was the summer of 2018, that it was released from the Liberal government. And so, we are expecting there to be some changes, and I think we're okay with that in the main. We've had some interesting discussions and submitted some lengthy just discovery from our members. Of particular interest to us has been something new that we haven't seen yet, and that is a discussion around certifications and how the government might be looking at, or the OPC might be looking at, the idea of certifying as a means to show compliance or some sort of self-regulatory behavior that will be taken into consideration, as the commissioner looks into various case files. So I'm so curious to hear what you think of that, and in general, what you think of what's going on around the world.
Yeah, and that was a great introduction into exactly what our government is thinking about in terms of modernizing PIPEDA. So you're quite right. Back in June 2018, Minister Baines launched a national digital data consultation. And he wanted to hear from stakeholders in the industry how we can modernize our data use, protect individuals' data, yet encourage innovation within Canada. And so one of the issues that came up was certifications and seals. And perhaps that's something that we want to incorporate into PIPEDA as we try to modernize the private sector legislation. And I think that part of the reason that this even came up was because it's part of the GDPR. So GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which is an EU legislation, it's quite robust and prescriptive. Within that legislation, it covers the use of certification. And for those listeners who are interested in those particular articles, under Article 25.3, it indicates a certification mechanism may be used as an element to demonstrate compliance, which is exactly what you spoke about before. Mm-hmm. Now, another interesting part of the GDPR under Article 42 it indicates that certifications are actually encouraged by the Commission as a means to demonstrate due diligence. So we're seeing certification in that legislation quite a few times, and there's this this feeling or the message that in order to demonstrate compliance and in order to demonstrate due diligence, you can do that through a certification, and that is somewhat new in privacy.
Well, that sounds really interesting, and one of the things that a buzzword that makes us nervous and excited all at the same time. I can't figure out which one it is, but when we're talking to ISED, when we're talking to the OPC, there's a lot of discussion around adequacy and making sure that for the purposes of trade, for the purposes of just consistency across borders, that we are observing adequacy. So do you think that this is part of that, or do you think it falls into that?
Yeah. So. Absolutely. I think that because privacy legislation is somewhat different, although there's a lot of consistency within, through different jurisdictions and privacy legislation in jurisdictions, there is a lot of, there's a way to harmonize all of them because they all have very similar privacy principles. And so the use of certifications, I believe, would be a wonderful way to harmonize the various legislation, as well as create that congruency between the variances in legislation. So absolutely, I think this is one great way and an easy way for organizations to basically comply once and attest to many, right? You comply once through a certification, yet you attest to many different forms of legislation or standards or regulations.
Sure, it seems to me that this is a more accessible approach to compliance as well, right? Because I know that a sore spot from the OPC, I think this dates all the way back to a few years ago. They were talking about the idea of small to medium-sized businesses having real challenges trying to comply with PIPEDA. So the idea of certifications being a little bit more accessible to the SME market may have an added benefit, an accidental benefit almost, that can address that.
Yeah, I think that there's this fine balance that regulators need to take when they draft legislation, and they don't want to be too prescriptive because that may inhibit innovation. And so by having these certifications, I believe that the certification schemes can improve regulatory agility, right? So the regulators can be a little bit more agile with the way that they draft their legislation, knowing that there's a way to demonstrate compliance with the legislation through certification. And I think that that's a really great solution for, the debate between, should we make legislation more prescriptive or should we enable innovation? And I feel like certification is a great middle ground for both.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, you sound pretty positive about it. I'm wondering now whether KPMG has got any sort of program in mind, or what kind of work has been done at KPMG around certifications?
Right. So yes, absolutely. KPMG, in particular, the privacy group within KPMG has developed a privacy by design certification program. So just to give you a little bit of background about privacy by design, it was originally developed by Dr. Ann Cavoukian, the former Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario. I think most people are familiar with Anne, as well as Privacy by Design, which has the 7 foundational principles. And then Privacy by Design became law under GDPR and under Article 25. And so privacy by design is no longer just a concept. It really is, or it's no longer a concept or a best practice, but it actually is a legal and fully enforceable obligation under or within the EU. So we have the principle, we have the law, and soon to be a standard. So currently, an ISO standard is being drafted, and the ISO standard is ISO 31700 Consumer Protection Privacy by Design for Consumer Goods and Services. Okay, so this goes really well with certifications. Certifications usually are use a standard as a benchmark. Now, since privacy by design is not currently a standard, we've had a lot of market interest in still being certified against privacy by design, even though that standard has not been formalized yet. So what KPMG has done is we have operationalized privacy by design. Because one of the big issues with privacy by design in GDPR is, how do you prove it? How do you operationalize privacy by design? What is privacy by design? So KPMG has developed a framework around the 7 principles, and we've created 30 criteria and 94 controls, all within one big framework. We looked at the GDPR, we looked at PIPEDA, we looked at regulatory guidance, security standards, we looked at best practices. Everything is incorporated into one framework. And if you recall, I said comply once, attest to many, and that's really what we wanted to get out of this framework. So a company will approach us. They will ask to be assessed against the privacy by design framework, which is what we do. And then once we identify that they have met all the 30 criteria of the privacy by design framework, the next step is for them to go to PECB. And PECB is a partner of ours, and they provide the certification. They're an accredited certification body.
Okay, so that's the compliance arm to the program.
That's exactly it.
Fantastic. Yeah. And do they do that on a regular basis? Is that an annual process, or is that a one-time process once they've accomplished the certification until you make changes to it, obviously?
That's right. So and that's a good question. So the way it works is once the organization has met the 30 criteria and moved on to PECB as a second step to get the actual certification seal, that seal is good for 3 years.
Okay.
And
Perfect.
Every year they must self-attest to the fact that there has been no material change. Now, when we assess an organization, we're not certifying the organization itself. We're assessing a product or a service that they offer. Okay, so they will have to attest every year that there has been no material change to the product or service.
What would be an example of a product? So when you're looking at, I know that might be a loaded question, but
no, not at all.
But what would a product look like?
Right. So, for example, a product would be an application. Right?
Okay.
Yeah. So we've had clients who have an application, and end users, of course, use that application on a daily basis, and they want to differentiate themselves. They want to be a competitor in the market, and they want to make sure that their consumers can trust that product. And so they decide that they want to get that privacy by design certification to prove to the public that they have done their due diligence, they're being proactive about both privacy and security, and that they build that form of trust with their consumers.
That's amazing. And so when you, this is just a bit of a general question. I always like to understand where the industry is in terms of understanding not just their obligations, but also how proactive they're being on the privacy front and on the ethics front. But that's a whole other, maybe you can come back and we can talk about ethics another day, because it's just such a rich topic. But are you seeing that the organizations that in the main that are approaching KPMG are ones that have privacy officers in-house, or are you seeing this as a completely outsourced process what is the mix of clients that you're seeing? Are they, on the privacy literacy scale, right? From one meaning, they zero, they didn't even know that PIPEDA existed, last week, to 10 where they've invested heavily in a chief privacy officer and outside legal counsel, etc.
Yeah. So Sonia, we see it all. And I wish I can really tell you that we mostly see one sort of organization that wants a certification, but the truth is that we see startups wanting the certification because they need funding, or for example, they can't get in through the door of, for example, a hospital without having some sort of proof that they are privacy compliant. Mm-hmm. But then we also see, for example, telecom company or telco companies come to us and ask for a certification, and their privacy maturity is fantastic, right? And very few gaps identified there. So we're seeing everything, end to end and everything in between. But I would say that I'd probably lean a little bit more towards the medium to large enterprises that are coming to us more because they feel that they want that almost like brand recognition, mm-hmm. through KPMG, of course, right?
Okay, yeah. So that kind of leads me that you're kind of like inciting the journalistic spirit in me now. I'm so sorry.
Bring it on.
Yeah, but now I'm wondering, if I were to reframe the question, are people coming to you proactively because they want that, or are they coming out of fear? Mm-hmm. And just sort of not really understanding how to navigate PIPEDA and wanting to do everything that they can outside of there is nothing else.
The one thing that I'm surprised about, and perhaps I shouldn't be surprised about, and something that makes me so happy and proud, is that a lot of the companies that we certify, they do it because they just want to build a trust relationship. And, I've been in board meetings and spoken to executives that say this is not about compliance. We have a compliance team. We know they're doing a great job. You are here in this room because we want to build trust.
That's lovely.
And that's what it's about. And it makes me so happy to hear that, because at the end of the day, that is what it's about. Mm-hmm. It's about
that's
building
fantastic.
The trust.
Yeah, and I know that, I alluded to it earlier, but we are taking on more and more conversations around ethics and proactive best practices. We've had this conversation since like the late 90s around the fact that the consumer will always have control over the market. It's so bizarre to me that we're, 20 years in or 25 years in, we're now kind of relitigating that, right? And the fact that regulators have had to step in to make the point was a little bit disheartening. And so to hear your message and to hear that people are actually now wanting to do the right thing ahead of the game, that's a really good story. That's a good story for the industry, and it shows that the needle is actually moving in the right direction finally, after so many years. So not to cut off the important work that's being done on the privacy part, but it seems to me then that if you're working alongside startups and all sorts of different businesses who are now obviously managing enormous amounts of data, whether it's sensitive or not, that would lead me to imagine that KPMG is getting more and more involved with just general data management and possibly different AI models. Is that something that is on the horizon for KPMG?
Yeah, and another great question. Currently, actually, we are certifying an AI company and in reviewing their AI processes. And what we've done, that framework that I talked about, that big framework that's, that we've incorporated all various legislation and regulatory guidance, in that framework, we've incorporated sophisticated controls around AI, IoT, apps, all emerging technologies. And we are assessing this AI company against a lot of ethical controls and guidelines that are out there. And so it's so wonderful to see that this isn't just about, data itself. It's about ethics. It's about wanting to do the right thing by their consumers through emerging technology. And this is all very new. There isn't a lot of legislation, as you know, around AI. And so this is really groundbreaking, and we feel really excited to be involved in that kind of work.
It's coming. I mean, it's we're behind our nerdy closed doors in not just the Canadian market, but in other markets. It's still in its nascent stages. We are starting to talk about some of the ethical issues that will start to come to surface internationally, and we're also trying to figure out technically how we can build workarounds that complement some of the frameworks that you speak of, right? And how can we technically enable companies to do right by the consumer and the citizen? So it's just a really interesting space. And I know that you don't have a crystal ball, but maybe you do. I don't know. To sort of summarize or to end our discussion, I'm just wondering, what do you think is the likelihood of this amended PIPEDA allowing for certifications and for real meaningful recognition of these certifications? What do you think?
I think it's going to happen. I really do. I think that this, as I said before, this is a great solution to the problem, the disparity between needing that innovation within Canada and wanting to be leaders in innovation and technology, but yet needing to build that protection and trust for the consumers. And I think the certification really allows for that regulatory agility. And to me, that's a perfect solution. And because we're seeing the government looking at GDPR and perhaps not mirroring it exactly, it's taking a lot of concepts out of GDPR, and we've seen those recommendations, and there were those 19 recommendations to amend PIPEDA, and one of those recommendations was actually privacy by design. And so it wouldn't surprise me to see something in there about certification. Of course, like you said, I don't have a crystal ball, but I would love to see it in there.
Well, so would we, because it sounds like it would be good news for the industry, and we are also, always in the pursuit of finding balanced solutions to citizen protection and innovation. So. With that, Sharon, I'm sure you're busy. You've got some certifications to do, and the industry to protect. So I wanted to thank you on behalf of IAB Canada and all of our listeners for spending the time with us this morning in Toronto, and really hope that we can have a chat again, a follow-up chat. Maybe, I don't know, like, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but maybe Q1 or Q2 to talk about stuff, right? And maybe we can catch up and figure out, as it's a moving ball, so we can catch up again. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us on IAB Canada's podcast, The Business of Digital.
This is a machine that a lot of people are going to be able to afford. That's a very, very